Although now that we say this, I'm going to see if I can talk Tim into renting goats for the AV tweet up at InfoComm, and just I have no control over budget anymore, so I can't do it. On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk hands-on with Matter, how awesome Sony is, and Expo's networking opportunities. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 376, Grade 8 Dances. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, I'm pleased to be joined by my good friends, Shannon Humphrey. He is the president of MSC Audio. How you doing, Shannon?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And then we have Mr. Jason Knott. He's the chief content officer and semi-pro golfer at CE Pro.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to rag on you for that one for a while. I shot an 82 and it was bad. Like Rombo up there. All right, gentlemen, let's kick this off with a story that comes to us from Residential Tech Today. Hands-on with the Matter Smart Home Protocol from Jay Basin. Jay goes through and kind of highlights where Matter is today, and then jumps into a couple of manufacturers and what Matter products they've got that he was able to test and play with. Shannon, let me start with you on this. Matter's been announced for a while. It's been in the wild for a little bit, and to Jay's point, we're starting to see a couple of manufacturers that have put out some actual product with Matter built into it. When will our channel, the CEDIA channel, look at Matter and say, yeah, we're ready to not play with this internally and do testing and all that fun stuff, which we're probably already doing. But when will integrators start to look at this as an actual, product that they're going to start speccing and start using? Is it today? Is it down the road?
Oh, I think it's going to be down the road for sure. I look at it like on the commercial side with the Dante. I think it's really going to be something that's going to be slow at first. And then, some big boys are going to jump in with some really cool products like Shure did on the commercial side. And it's really going to start pulling more people into the fray. And they're really going to start, I think it's going to be a really slow build up, and then it's just going to explode. And this seems like something that will have some traction. We've got, some big boys already on board. They really don't have anything, any huge projects or anything like that they've announced yet. But I'm assuming obviously Apple, Google, Amazon, they're going to start putting it on their things, and they're going to start pushing it out.
That's a good point. Jason, what is the near future, like less than 5 years, look for with Matter? Because we've been following it obviously a little bit on the show. I know you have from the CE Pro standpoint. It's got legs, but it's also already hit speed bumps. There's already some funkiness with Matter in the field and from a manufacturing standpoint, at least from what I'm hearing. What's the next 3-4 years look like for the protocol?
Well, I think clearly when I read the article, it was clearly targeted towards the DIY individual who was the reader, versus the professional installer. And in fact, it had some bullet points that he was going through on how he actually loaded up some of the devices. And it kind of proved the point to me of that for many consumers, they are not going to do that. Yeah. And that there really is a do-it-for-me market out there. I had an integrator. I was out at the ProSource meeting a few weeks back, and I asked about do-it-for-me versus DIY, and he goes, everything I do is do-it-for-me. It could be $1 million system, but it's do-it-for-me. He goes, every system. So I think this article really kind of proves that point, that it's really a do-it-for-me type of scenario for the short term right now, until I think, and again, we all got eventually comfortable with smartphones and streaming media and all those sorts of things that did come about. but I think in the short term, it's still a do-it-for-me space for integrators to be able to. They could show this article flat out to a customer and say, "Are you willing to do this?" And most of them are going to say no.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, gentlemen, let's change topics for a second. This comes to us from CE Pro. Sony literally helped keep me in business during the supply chain situation. Integrators are recounting how Sony was their ideal partner through this past year's CE Pro's Quest for Quality Awards. Read through this short article real quick. And there's some really, really good feedback and encouragement and I don't know, props given to Sony for how they went through the pandemic from not only a service, but a supply, et cetera, situation. Obviously, Jason, this comes from the Quest for Quality, where you're getting a lot of feedback. I'm looking forward to the name dropping of all the companies that did a really poor job of this.
I have those.
You can share it with me. I promise. I won't tell anybody. I won't bring it up on a show. I'll put it in my pocket. What did the pandemic and the supply chain aspect of that, did that be or is that a seminal moment that made manufacturers, in this case Sony, who won customers for life versus lost customers for life? Am I being too black and white on that issue?
A little bit. I think in regard to supply chain, if you wanted to isolate just on the supply chain portion of that during the pandemic, clearly there were integrators who had to find new choices because they were just not able to get their favorite products. But I think the fundamentals that Sony has in place, and I can remember doing an article over 10 years ago on the tech support team at Sony. So Sony 10 years ago had a dedicated tech support team for the integration channel versus some manufacturers do not.
Yeah.
They have a shared consumer / integrator phone base or tech support where I hear from integrators all the time, oh, that's an hour phone call if my guy's got a call from the field, an hour wait. So I think some of those fundamentals that Sony has in place, meaning, dedicated tech support being right up at the top of it. Also, I think sharing with customers their product roadmap.
Yeah.
I think that that's very important for the integrators to know what's coming down the pike. So those sorts of things were predated the pandemic. The supply chain, yes, I think that's another checklist that every manufacturer, when they're talking to a customer going forth, they should absolutely be talking about their product roadmap. They should be talking about the status of their supply chain, and they should be talking about their tech support.
So before we go to Shannon, let me ask you this: if it wasn't a moment that necessarily would win you lifelong, were there issues that were big enough over this time period that will turn dealers off for life?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, we were joking about some of the frustration comments that I have from dealers talking about what they see as extreme price gouging that was taking place by the manufacturers in certain cases. And I think, I don't want to say it all comes down to price, but a lot of time it does, or just communication, lack thereof of communication of what was the status of when these products were going to come in. How the prices were changing consistently. So it's a good point. I think it's going to be tough for some companies to recover from this who did a really poor job during the last 2.5 years. And there's going to be some companies that were heroes. They did really well and they probably earned loyalty. But whether that be for life, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball to be able to tell that, whether those dealers will eventually go back to those manufacturers who they had trouble with before, because there could be various reasons. They could have a ton of legacy of clientele out there with that other manufacturer, so they want to maintain that relationship. They want to keep using that brand. So there's so many different variables. It's hard for me to tell.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I didn't answer your question.
No. You did. You did. Shannon, let me ask you this: from the manufacturer's standpoint, what do you have to do to try and see these kinds of reports spoken about? And again, I'm not specifically trying to single out MSE, but just in general, as a manufacturer, what do you have to do to try and reap these types of kudos from your dealers?
Well, obviously, Sony has their stuff together. They really know what they're doing. They see what's important out there in the market, and from my standpoint, it's trying to be all things all at once. What was that movie that just came out? Everything, everywhere, all at once, or something like that.
Everywhere all at once.
To me, that's really what it's all about. Is I have to be everything to to our customers, our dealers, because they need their supplies on time. They need tech support, customer service, all of those things. And so, what's really stood out to me, and not to really spend a lot of time talking Sony up, but they won five, or had five mentions on there, and that goes to the whole the organization as a whole. We were lucky enough to be on there a couple times as well, and so I think it just goes to show what they're doing as a whole, what they're bringing to the table, and that they really value their partners. They want to be a good partner, and they want to be somebody people can rely on. And that's really what it boils down to. All of the shipping craziness that happened over the past few years, it was very clear that Sony and those that made it on the supply chain side of things really invested heavily in that, and put some effort into that. That just didn't happen overnight. They had to put money, time, sweat and tears into it. So, and that's really what it boils down to, is just making sure you're delivering all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, gentlemen, let's change topics kind of to the future for a second. This comes to us from ResTech Today as well, and a good friend of the show, Mr. Jeremy Glowacki. CEDIA Expo 2023 is going to feature networking opportunities to engage the integration community. There's a really good quote in here from Jason McGraw from Emerald, talking about how networking is a crucial aspect of trade shows and events. So they've got a bunch of things. Shannon, I know you're very disappointed that there will be yoga, but not goat yoga, but that's okay. I'm also disappointed about that. Katie, if you could set that up, maybe I'll participate. But a bunch of things that they're doing. Shannon, I'm all in favor of more networking opportunities, but I also feel at most networking opportunities that I go to that are billed that way, that I'm in grade 8 going to a dance, and the three of us are standing on one side of the gym and all the girls are standing on the other side of the gym as we talk about things directly not related to the dance that we were invited to. Can organizations and trade shows, can they truly foster organic networking? Or is it kind of one of those, hey, we're going to get everybody into a room and hope they talk to each other?
Well, that's a tough one. I think, obviously, from a manufacturing standpoint, we really put a lot of effort into our booth. We put a lot of effort into, focusing that we look good on the showroom floor. But the reality of it is that most of the strides that we make are in the networking. And so I think, as an organization, I think we have to just make sure that the people that we're sending to these events are really, that they understand the importance of the networking and understand what that can really mean for the company. I can send an engineer to CEDIA, and they might meet another manufacturer or something that I hadn't even thought about partnering with, and we might end up with a really lucrative partnership. So I think it's just really important to make sure that everyone that goes understands that, and understands that this is not just about looking at walking the floor and looking at speakers and maybe going to some fun party on Thursday night or whatever. It's more it's more about the relationships and who you understand, who you meet, and understanding how you can help each other in the space.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Jason, put it in your calendar. Shannon's hosting a party on Thursday night, and we're both
There
invited.
you go. Come on over.
Perfect. Excellent. Jason, in the past, most people that attended the show came because they were looking for product. They were looking for things. And the sidebar of that was they were excited to see friends and partners and people that, obviously they work with a lot that they may not see in person often. There seems to have been a shift a little bit the last couple of years, especially kind of coming out of the pandemic, where the networking side almost became bigger than the show itself. Does that hold true? Is that just a factor of social media and how connected we all are now, even when we're not together? What's driving this?
No, it's funny. I agree that the networking element has become so important to all these conferences. Whether you remember,
Mhm.
we're not just, this isn't just a trade show. It's got a whole education element,
Yeah.
put together by CEDIA that's very powerful, and that breeds conversation. But this reminded me of, and you and Shannon talking reminded me of. I remember having a professor years ago who, when you first walked into the class, he would first thing he would say was, "Any questions?" And there was never any questions because he hadn't stimulated us in any way, shape, or form. He hadn't said, "Oh, last week we talked about this, this, this. That
Mhm.
was really interesting. Does anybody have any questions about that?" So I think there is an element of having to be able to guide people into networking. You can't just put a ballroom together with the guys and the girls on either side of the wall and say, go at it. There has to be some sort of, look, we're going to have a networking reception that's going to talk about workforce development, or we are going to, we want everybody who is interested in talking about creating career paths come to this, or
Mhm.
anybody wants to share ideas on working with builders, architects, designers, and realtors. I think there has to be a stimulating element to it. Now, beyond that, this market is a cottage industry made up of tons of small businesses.
Yeah.
So it's very, very unique. I've worked in other markets before. I've seen the security guys are a much bigger group of bigger companies. These companies who come to CEDIA are much smaller, and I believe they're much more engaged because of that, because they have small companies. They are looking for solutions with other small companies. So I think this is CEDIA is a very unique group. It's a very unique industry. And I believe that the networking element of CEDIA Expo is just as powerful as the product part of it. So long-winded answer, but I think if you can stimulate, and whether that might be goats, maybe we need a goat
There you
yoga,
go.
element, and come with your greatest of all time. Hey, I'm getting this greatest
Ooh,
of
there you
all
go.
time product problem, and share it with the goats. Get it, goats, greatest of all time,
I
goats
got it.
yoga. I love
It's
it.
terrible.
I'm just
I'm although now that we say this, I'm going to see if I can talk Tim into renting goats for the AV tweet up at InfoComm, and just I have no control over budget anymore, so I can't do it. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap this up with a story that comes to us from CE Pro. Google to start transferring Nest Secure systems over to ADT. If you are someone who either has or has clients who has Nest Secure products, they're going to drop their support for this in April of 2024. But over the next couple of months, the Nest Secure and the Drop Cam are going to fall out of the Nest app, so you won't be able to find it there. But when you go over to, or you'll have an opportunity to go over to ADT and get a free system through them, as long as it's less than $485. Again, this is in the US, so if you're not in the US, I have no idea, no clue. Jason, let me start with you on this. I'm a little surprised at this, although I realize kind of why they're doing it and what's going on. But where does this leave the customers that typically would have purchased Nest Secure because they didn't want to go to companies like ADT or whatever other big alarm company that you want to throw into the conversation. That was the normal path for end users in buying these systems, was they didn't want the big system from the big company with the 3-year, plan that they had to sign up for. Where does this leave customers going forward?
Well, I don't think it's good that this happens, because let's just say that entry level customer who spent $500
Yeah.
on Nest Secure, the idea of what we all believe, that the DIY customer is going to help feed the do it for me part of this business, that the customer gets a taste of a smart home, loves it, and says, wow, I want to automate my blinds, I want to do all these other things, that now let me hire a professional and bring that in, so and upgrade. So it does, I think, hurt the smart home industry overall when something like this happens, because even though an integrator could look at this and go, that guy wasn't my customer anyway, I wasn't going to get him. The idea of this upgrade path and bringing these do-it-yourselfers into the do-it-for-me part of the business, and then eventually into luxury installation, it's true. It does happen. People have to get a taste that way. So I think it sets back a lot of DIYers from looking at this space and wanting to have a smart home, which eventually I think hurts integrators who would be able to garner those customers as they upgrade. So it's disappointing that this happened.
Does it mean more because it's a Google product? And I realize originally it was a Nest product. Like this predates their acquisition, or Google's acquisition of Nest. But does it hurt more? Like, I didn't feel the pain, and I never heard from a customer when a random smart device that showed up at Home Depot only lasted a year and a half. Does it hurt more because it's Google?
I think so. You could look at Oro, which we all know recently went out of business, and as a startup, and a great product, really, really cool solution. I think integrators are very conservative in terms of wanting to take a risk on a startup solution like that, because if that company goes out of business, then it's like, okay, who am I going to be able to service my account base out there? So when something like this happens from Google, I think it is more important than it happening from a smaller company.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Shannon, let's wrap this up with you. On the flip side of this conversation, we've got Google, for lack of a better term, giving something away. Typically, when especially the big GAFA companies have a technology that they stop supporting, it literally dies. They don't sell it off. They don't hand it off in this case. It dies. And usually it's a couple of people like myself or Jason who are like, whatever happened to that, as we bemoan something on a show? What does it mean? Is Google taking a different approach here because they're actually giving away essentially not the IP, but they're not just canning this?
I think it's a smart way to exit. From my perspective, you're not leaving your customers completely in the dark. You're not just completely, canning the whole thing. It is unfortunate because they are Nest, and everybody knows who Nest is. Just like everybody knows who Ring is. But from their perspective, I have to give them props that they're not just dropping the whole thing. They're passing it off, and I'm sure ADT's very happy to have the business. It's just a tough thing to deal with whenever you have to discontinue a product or stop a certain offering just to make sure your customers are happy.
To their point, we were talking earlier, it wasn't like this was a surprise. Right. They stopped selling it in October of 2020. Right.
Yeah.
So
but
it was
odd,
3 years.
I still get occasionally asked for it, like in the past year. Yeah. And again, we never sold it. We never supported it, but I'll have a customer's like, man, I really want to get a cheap alarm system. I should get that Nest thing, right? I'm like, no. we don't really do alarms, so it's not a big deal. But it's like, sure, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Google it. See. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for joining us. Jason, if people want to connect with you, learn more about CE Pro, where can they do that?
Everybody can go to cepro.com and subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the magazine for free, and then you can follow me on Twitter at Jason W. Knott.
Excellent, where he will bemoan getting 82s in golf. Yeah, you're not living that down, dude. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to connect with you, learn more about MSE Audio, where can they do that?
Yeah, thank you for having me. You can go to mseaudio.com. You can email me at shumphrey@mseaudio.com, or you can put in any of our brands, soundtube.com, facetech.com, rockusics.com.
Excellent. Thank you both again. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott and most other social platforms. But more importantly, please visit AVNation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you check them out as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.